What if I told you that validation is now a commodity? Nothing says late-stage capitalism like turning self-obsession into a catchphrase for content creation. Let's talk about the rise and evolution of main character energy, because this phrase didn't just show up one day. It emerged from a very specific cultural cocktail: TikTok therapy talk, personal branding hype, pandemic lockdowns, and that timeless human craving for confidence. While TikTok was the catalyst for main character energy exploding, the idea of seeing yourself as the main character had been around for much, much longer. The concept of centering yourself in the world has been in everything from self-help books to social media posts for a very long time, so it's not new. And prior to the emergence of main character energy, we had main character syndrome, which had a much more negative association: someone who sees themselves at the center of the world, but in a way that lessens the importance of the people around them. In other words, other people get relegated to the role of supporting character, or NPC, and they aren't seen as full people, which is pretty crappy. And prior to this, we had, and still have, expressions like center of attention and the world revolves around them, to talk about people who, whether for good or evil purposes, attracted or pulled lots of energy in. So what differentiated main character energy from these other expressions was that it emerged at a time where culturally, economically, and even technologically, the ground was shifting, and in some cases very, very quickly. With the rise of social media, and especially influencer culture, people became encouraged to create a personal brand, making themselves into a sort of packageable product to sell things, connect with people, and it was important to be consistent. The rise of social media also saw the rise of therapy and wellness content, and common themes in a lot of this content were relating to centering yourself in your world, building confidence through empowerment, and learning to appreciate life's small moments, which is great, I love that. So when the pandemic hit in 2020 and people were driven inside and onto their phones and computers, these two forces, plus an innate desire for human validation, which already existed on social platforms, coalesced, and people began to find ways to romanticize even the smallest moments of their lives. The trend really took off when a TikTok video by Ashley Ward, posted in May of 2020, exploded to over 500,000 views.
You have to start romanticizing your life. You have to start thinking of yourself as the main character. Because if you don't, life will continue to pass you by.
I decided to play researcher, and I did a search of Twitter to see if I could pinpoint when main character energy gained steam. In 2018, it was used in 5 tweets, but none of the tweets are definitions, which leads me to believe the phrase came from somewhere else. TikTok is probably the most likely culprit here. And in 2019, there was an uptick to 48 tweets. But in 2020, oh my God, there's a huge upswell. I counted 100 uses within the last 3 days of December alone. I'm not gonna go back and count all the instances in 2020 because there are way too many, but yeah, that's when it really kicked off. When you think about it, it's really understandable that in 2020, at a time when lots of people felt like they were stuck or out of control or even hopeless, that people would gravitate towards an expression that kind of makes them feel like they're at the center of everything, like they have a personal story to tell and their own narrative going for them. And this idea worked incredibly well alongside the concept of having a personal brand on social media. By tying the idea of your personal, self-centric narrative to your personal brand, many suddenly found that they could commoditize their stories. And this also isn't new. The concept of creating a story for your brand is a very well-documented marketing technique. But with the influx of users tapping into the usefulness of having a story to tell and a personal narrative to follow, the tide of main character energy rose very quickly. And I think this works especially well in Western countries because it taps into the concept of being the hero of your own story. But it is worth noting that when I see main character energy being used, it's usually to suggest that you are the protagonist and you've got some kind of adventure going, like you're living in a movie that you're starring in and directing. So you're gonna have some character development and some beautiful scenes to do, and you're gonna grow and evolve and see new things, which all sound really positive and wonderful, right? And I think that they are in a lot of cases. But there are tons of main characters from stories throughout history that don't have this positive, wonderful story arc to experience. Or they're just depicted living through like horrifying conditions. Have you ever seen a war film? Yeah, the main character definitely has a different type of energy in those movies, right? So while main character energy sprung up in 2020 as a mostly fun, humorous, and sometimes kind of good-naturedly self-deprecating way to talk about someone being the center of a story, there were and are darker sides to this phenomenon.
You filming already? Man, gang shit, man. Wendy shit, man.
We're Where this concept gets problematic is the point at which the main character starts to disregard the people around them in pursuit of these personal narratives and goals. And unlike other trends that began online, seeing yourself as the main character isn't restricted to social media feeds. It now appears in the workplace, in politics, in public settings, and even in personal relationships. There's even a rise in weaponization of therapy speak because some people are unwilling to take accountability for negative actions. And instead, they think that their behaviors, no matter how detrimental to others, are justifiable because the behaviors are in pursuit of their main character's progress toward their personal goals. So you can maybe see that at a large scale, this gets really problematic. In the less severe examples of this kind of main character energy, we see irritating, embarrassing, or just kind of cringe examples, like a person who refuses to shut off their speaker in public transit, or someone who expects special treatment from strangers, or even behaviors like in this video that I found. But on the more severe level, we see people doing genuinely dangerous things, like driving super recklessly, or they're harassing retail and service workers for views, or they even exploit really sensitive topics and situations to paint themselves in a certain light. That means things like doing photo shoots at serious protests, or using deeply ill people for content, which is really messed up. And even worse, the same commodification we talked about earlier applies to these negative behaviors too. Some people have learned that creating disruptions in real life communities and online creates a feedback loop of attention, validation, and money. I think this is why we're starting to see a rise in content that people are calling like nuisance streaming, or nuisance videos, where people will intentionally go to places to try to like disrupt their place of business or start a fight or have some kind of an argument or something like that. They record it and then they get views for it and then they get money for it. So in other words, people learn that they get rewarded for behavior that hurts others. This dichotomy between the positive version and negative version of main character energy has led to discussions by philosophers, psychologists, marketers, and all kinds of regular people about where the line is between empowerment and self-obsession. And there are voices expressing growing concern about too much emphasis on the self without consideration for how we connect to others. Relating to other people is what builds our communities and cities, and those relationships also contribute to our personal stories. And when we create things, we advertise the type of person we are. If a generation of people grow up who only know how to consider their own needs, where will that put us in the professional world, in the political world, in academia? We already have examples of political leaders who put their own desires first, and it's not pretty. So what's the takeaway here? Appreciating the nice moments in your life, focusing on the life you want to build for yourself, and creating your own stories can be positive, empowering, and fun things to do to make progress, build community, and yes, even build an online business. At the same time, it's important to remember that even those supporting characters are people, and although they're not on the same path as us, they are indeed part of the story, and we're all building a community together in the real world and online. Main character energy doesn't seem to be a concept that's going away soon, so it's important to consider where the line is between self-obsessed and empowered. For now, maybe the best approach is one of cognizance and self-reflection, which is a good habit for anyone to have. Let me know what you think about main character energy in the comments, and see you next time, fellow protagonists.